Welcome back. My name's Jay. I've been a clinical instructor for about 6 years, been doing X-ray for about 16. One of the biggest questions that I get from my students is, how do I adjust my KVP versus MAS and when do I do it? So we came up with some analogies that can kind of help us understand this a little bit better. It has to do with the waterfall, some rocks, and a garden hose. So hope this helps. Being a new student, you're going to get so much information thrown at you. So it's kind of how do you tackle all of this? And I find that if you come up with some sort of acronyms or kind of short cheat codes, I call them, to help you remember things, that's going to really help you in the long run remember this stuff for your career. So these exposure settings confuse many students, right? So here's something that can help. This analogy turns the abstract photon behavior and kind of hearing it in physics terms and kind of puts it into a more layman kind of presentation. So again, a waterfall, which can designate body habitus, rock, which is going to designate our photons, or MAS, leaving the tube. All right, the core analogy of the waterfall. How are we setting this up? So first, we have to think about the waterfall again as our patient body habitus. Thin waterfall, going to be sthenic. Hypersthenic would be a Niagara Falls type waterfall. Now behind each of these waterfalls is a wall that the water goes over. So we're on a little walk for the day and we come across these waterfalls and we're like, we want to throw a rock through that waterfall to hit the wall on the other side. Well, a thin patient, it's going to be very easy for us to stand at 40 inches, 72 inches, whatever you want to do, and throw a rock, if it was like a pitcher speed, 50 miles an hour and hit that wall on the other side. But if we're at a Niagara Falls sized waterfall and we 50 miles an hour speed threw that rock into that Niagara Falls very hypersthenic patient, we're not going to have enough power to transmit through to hit the wall on the other side. So that's where we learn we have to increase that transmission rate of the power, which is the KVP. So we increase the KVP, that increases the transmission rate, which will help cut that rock through that waterfall to hit the wall on the other side. So just to kind of recap, that small waterfall is like that thin sthenic patient. The rock's going to pass through pretty easily with you just throwing that rock just at a medium kind of speed. Or like a baseball pitcher, throwing it really light, 50 miles an hour versus 100 miles an hour. The large waterfall, however, the obese or bariatric patient, it's going to slow or defect that rock only going 50 miles an hour. So that baseball pitcher or you throwing a rock through a waterfall would have to throw a lot faster, right? So if you want to cut through that water to hit a hypothetical wall on the opposite side of a waterfall, you're going to have to throw that rock faster. So in X-ray terms, that pretty much means that us throwing that rock faster is almost like us increasing our KVP, right? So higher KVP means the photons have that greater energy and the better penetration through that dense tissue. However, there's a trade-off, and that means that higher KVP also increases the amount of scatter, and that can reduce the subject contrast if it's used excessively. So the waterfall is kind of helping us visualize our patient's body habitus. But now how do we visualize how KVP increases? And when we increase KVP, the scatter that comes along with that. And I kind of thought of a garden hose, right? So if we have low KVP, it's like having that garden hose on and open and the water's just coming out. It's kind of more of a straight stream that doesn't kind of travel very far and it has very little side spray. But if we wanted that same stream to go further across the lawn or to hit a wall or whatever it was, how could we do that? Well, you could turn the water up, but that only still goes so far. But if we took our finger and we put it over the front edge of that hose, it's going to create a spray. And we've all done it as kids. So that spray then can go a lot further and hypothetically give you that distance you want. But when we do that, just like with the hose, you get that side spray that kind of diverts out. And as we increase KVP, we increase scatter production. So as you increase the speed of your hose and the water coming out by placing your thumb over that front edge of the hose, that side kind of spray is kind of a visually how you can think about that scatter coming along as we increase that power of that water to go that greater distance. So again, the rocks, the number of rocks that you're throwing is going to kind of correlate to your MAS. And the KVP, it's like putting your hand over the front edge of a garden hose. As we increase that, it actually increases that scatter production by knowing about that divergent. So How do we tell on these images? You can definitely speak with your clinical instructors, hoping that some of this makes a little bit more sense. Sometimes you have to look at the image. If there's not enough MAS reaching, it looks modelly, kind of blotchy. If it's too gray, that might mean that there's too much KVP, and you might have to lower your KVP because too much scatter is reaching your image receptor. So you have to evaluate your images on a case-by-case scenario, usually with some other stuff. All right, so some quick examples for some quick workflow. If we're kind of dealing with a limb, like a humerus or something like that, our KVP is probably pretty accurate, or even standard, just being pre-programmed into the computer. We probably, if it looks a little modelly, would have to adjust our mAs. But if we're working with chest, abdomen, or a large patient, we might have to increase the KVP to increase that transmission rate of those photons so that they can reach the image receptor, then tweak the mAs after that if it still looks a little modelly. Okay, so quick summary. So the patient size is basically the waterfall thickness. Your KVP is going to control the energy or your throwing speed, which also increases the penetration, but also scatters. So MAS controls the quantity or the number of the photons, which affects your image density. All right, that's about it. Thanks for watching. I hope this helped you in some way kind of understand KVP and MAS and how to adjust them. The big takeaway is as we increase KVP, we increase that scatter production, or it's produced in the tube, but it gets to leave the tube. So what you have to do is understand that scatter when it leaves the tube, it grays our image. And if we're working with short scale contrast or something like a bone, a hand, we prefer that short scale contrast. That way we can see the soft tissue, the cortex of the bone, the trabeculi of the bone, back to the skin of the soft tissue, the air. Whereas in an abdomen, which would be more of a long scale contrast, it's harder to see all those organs because they're all made out of a lot of the same tissues, so they all kind of blend together. That's why they need a larger scale of grays. But understanding that both short and long scale contrast each have grays in them. Short scale contrast sometimes gets described as black versus white, but you have to remember there is still a level of gray in there because when you're looking at the X-ray, you can see it. So it's just the level of grays in short scale is a lot thinner than the level of grays that is in your long scale contrast. So I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.